Sisko's trying to solve a problem. One of the Darbo girls in Quark's establishment is sick of his sexual harassment, but there's a wrinkle. It's part of the job. And I don't just mean that it's expected, it's literally in her employment contract. That raises some interesting questions over whose legal system takes precedence on Deep Space Nine, what with it being a Bajoran station with Federation administrators, and how much autonomy foreign interests are allowed. Like many interesting questions in Trek, we're going to ignore it because this episode's real plot has arrived. Something's coming through the wormhole and it's not a scheduled flight. The Prophet swirly pops open and spits out a ship we don't recognise. We give the pilot a call and find he's got one or two technical problems from the looks of things. He's also surprised to learn where he is, but seems in a hurry to be elsewhere. That's not an option with his ship in its current state, though he refuses to be teleported off, so O'Brien manages to convince him to let us tractor him in for repairs. As our guest has responded positively to O'Brien, Sisko thinks having him be our welcoming party might be the most diplomatic choice. With a little luck, we might even find out why he's in such a hurry, too. O'Brien's at the ship. Unfortunately, the pilot isn't. That's what it looks like anyway, though Dax says scans show he's still in there. Maybe he's just shy, so O'Brien tries to explain that he's a friend and here to help. There's still no response, so he instead gets to work. At least, he tries to, but the systems are unfamiliar. While he's theorising about what does what, the pilot appears behind him, apparently disabling some sort of stealth effect. O'Brien's surprised when he gets a response, giving himself a bonk on the noggin for his troubles, but recovers well enough. The pilot knows what's wrong apparently, but the name of the tech is unfamiliar to O'Brien. That's a problem as the guy's still in a hurry, though seems a little reassured when told we'll be as quick as we can. O'Brien introduces himself, and we learn our guest is Tosk, though there's some ambiguity about whether that's his name or species. Maybe we can clear it up during a tour while we let Tosk's ship cool down. Despite some initial hesitation, he's very curious about who we are and what we're doing here, asking questions about everything he sees. That makes O'Brien wonder if he's an explorer, but when asked, Tosk simply replies that he's Tosk. Maybe his people have names that also explain their jobs. The tour ends with showing Tosk to some quarters, where we learn he only sleeps for 20 or so minutes a day and has minimal nutrient needs. He thanks O'Brien anyway, so that's progress of a sort. Once he's alone, he asks the computer where we store our guns. Maybe it's not that much progress after all. O'Brien's reporting to Sisko, and it's not entirely positive. He thinks Tosk is on the run from something, and his ship got a bit buggered too. Tosk implied it was the wormhole, but O'Brien knows what weapons damage looks like. Sisko tells O'Brien to stick with him, and says he'll ask Odo to keep an eye open too. Maybe the latter won't be necessary. O'Brien and Tosk seem to be getting on well, and the ship repairs are going more quickly now that Tosk is there to explain what does what. O'Brien's confident we can have him flying again within a couple of days, and after saying he'll palm the job off to his subordinates, invites Tosk for a drink to try and find out why he's in such a hurry. How we live our lives is very much a shock to Tosk. We sleep for a third of them and play for much of the time we're awake. It doesn't sound like he entirely approves. As somebody whose life is built around providing recreation, the idea of someone who doesn't like relaxing is viewed by Quark as a personal challenge. He offers Tosk adventure in a holosuite, possibly because they're not quite as popular after a guy got murdered in one. Tosk declines anyway, saying he's already on the greatest of adventures. Sounds like an opening to O'Brien, but Tosk has said all he's going to say on the matter and won't elaborate further. O'Brien's updating everybody on what he's learned, which isn't much. Tosk's certainly scarpering, but he can't tell from what, and O'Brien says he doesn't feel like a threat or a fraud. Ultimately, the guy's done nothing wrong, so we don't have any reason to keep him here. When his ship's fixed, we'll just have to wave him on his way and chalk it up as a mystery. That is, unless he does something silly, like try to break into the armory, for example. Odo's watching, of course, disguised as a picture this time, and confronting Tosk makes him disappear. Odo's got no time for that shit though, and just locks down the corridor while calling for backup. Tosk reappears when he hits a force field, and again when he hits another. As those are the only two ways out, he becomes a touch more receptive to talking. He says he was trying to prepare, though won't explain what for, so we all trot down to security instead. Being in a cell and having the question asked by Sisko does nothing to make him more talkative. O'Brien arrives and confirms that Tosk's fiddling was an attempt to access weapons. That makes Odo ask if he's wanted for crimes. The idea seems to surprise him, and he responds that he's Tosk, as though the two were incompatible. Questions about that aren't answered either, so Sisko and Odo bugger off to leave him here. O'Brien hangs around and tries to get more, the result being that Tosk pleads with him to let him out so he can die with honour. We learn nothing more from Tosk, but maybe this new arrival can help. It's another ship through the wormhole and one that bears similarities to Tosk's. They ignore our calls and scanners, Sisko letting it happen before putting up shields. Maybe that was a mistake, as they do a science to bugger up those shields and then teleport aboard. To the promenade we go, where we find some aliens in jumpsuits and fishing waders, topped off with what you might get if you tried to order Daft Punk helmets from Wish. As an aside, for shits and giggles, I actually typed Daft Punk to see what I'd get. It may have been intended as a joke, but honestly, it's not far off the truth. Talking gets nowhere, and a step forward from Odo is met with being knocked on his arse. Either he forgot he can be liquid, or we pissed away the CGI budget when he was a painting, but the result is that it's poopin' time. Knockoff Daft Punk seem able to absorb the shots with a bracer of some kind, though getting hit in the tits puts them down. Not for long enough, and they slowly make their way to where Tosk is being held, before blowing the bloody doors off. The holding cell shows no sign of Tosk, but then that's hardly surprising, what with the invisibility and all. Daft Punk seems to know this, and illuminates their... well, I'm struggling to think of a name other than helmet clitoris. This casts a light which makes it possible to see Tosk, who reappears when he realises he's been rumbled. That seems to be the end of things, and we all pile in behind Daft Punk, who signals to their mates that they found Tosk. That makes them lead Daft Punk, I guess, and the helmet comes off to reveal similar, but not identical, features. He's disappointed, he says, finding Tosk trapped here. In fact, he'd go so far as to say this hunt is the worst he knows of. The realisation of what this is leaves Sisko a touch pissed off, partly from the whole idea, and partly because these dickheads charged through his station like they owned the place. I wonder if the irony of that was intentional. Anyway, that's probably why he tells lead Daft Punk to go fuck himself when he orders Tosk to be released. We're not doing anything until Sisko knows precisely what the bloody hell's going on. It's a plain, simple blood sport, says lead Daft Punk, something practiced by countless cultures. Okay, Tosk is sentient, but we made him that way. Tosk were created for this, and their actions are celebrated, even by Tosk themselves. Sisko can't comment on how they do things, but he can tell them to keep that shit off Deep Space Nine. Lead Daft Punk tells him that future hunts will be told not to use the wormhole before buggering off back to his ship. That doesn't leave Sisko with much choice. Interference is a prime directive matter, as this is their culture. It'd be different if Tosk requested asylum, of course, but despite O'Brien's best attempts to convince him, he refuses to do so. Being taken back alive to be paraded as a failure is less dishonourable than denying his duty. It's a proper shitter, and O'Brien's in a foul mood when he visits Quark's. Being asked if it's marital trouble doesn't help, but Quark eventually gets the reason out of him. O'Brien explains that he's bound by the rules, suggesting that Ferengi would just change them if they wanted to. Quark doesn't seem to mind the casual stereotyping, especially when O'Brien exclaims that's exactly what he should do, and thanks Quark for the idea. That's probably the first time Quark has been happy to accept credit. O'Brien's popped down to security to help oversee Tosk's transfer. When Odo questions it, he says Sisko gave the order. As Odo goes off to start an argument about jurisdiction, O'Brien tells lead Daft Punk that he'll escort them to their ship as a way of making amends for their disagreement, saying it's a sign of respect. Maybe leaving his comm badge on the desk is also a mark of respect. Sisko doesn't know anything about all this, of course, and after Odo barges in to complain, tries to call O'Brien. O'Brien's busy, though, guiding lead Daft Punk through a security scanner. It detects all of his weapons and stuns lead Daft Punk, something that's probably connected with O'Brien having a fuck about with the power before he went to meet Tosk. O'Brien twats him too for good measure before he and Tosk scarper. Lead Daft Punk is still conscious and tells his mates that shit's kicking off again, which is why one teleports in. Tosk takes care of him and they continue, but all these fights have been reported and Sisko is informed. Odo says he'll go and seal off the areas where they've been reported, only to be stopped by Sisko, who suggests that maybe he doesn't need to rush.
Ah, shit. Here we go again.
Despite some attempts to stop them, including lead Daft Punk and a couple of mates, Tosk prevents his recapture and they reach his ship. O'Brien declines an option to join him in being Tosk, though admits he's probably going to get a bollocking for this. Tosk departs, and the hunt begins anew. It's time for that bollocking. Sisko asks what happened with the security scanner, and O'Brien admits that he fiddled with it so it would stun lead Daft Punk when it detected his toys. That's not great news for Sisko. This is the first Gamma Quadrant species we've met, so starting a fight with them is going to require some very creative writing when it comes to making his report. O'Brien tries to suggest that what he did was what the Daft Punk guys actually wanted, but Sisko shuts him up and tells him that if he does this shit again, he'll be sent packing. Before he leaves, O'Brien asks why he and Tosk didn't get locked down behind force fields as soon as reports of fighting were made. That would have been standard security procedure. Sisko tells him that it must have slipped his mind, and O'Brien understands. He's dismissed, and we'll leave him to contemplate Tosk's fate until the next adventure. I've never quite understood the appeal of blood sports. The desire to make something dead for shits and giggles just seems absurd. The brave and daring big game hunter is a stereotype long known, this image of a figure stalking formidable prey at great personal risk. The reality, of course, is a dentist paying obscene amounts of cash to stick an arrow in a lion, the animal lured to him by others while he sits hidden and protected by people with guns. It qualifies as hunting in the same way that buying berries from a supermarket technically qualifies as gathering. It strikes me as so entirely lacking introspection, an inability to see the obvious juxtaposition between the image of oneself and the reality. Do it naked and unarmed, and then we'll have a chat about how you conquered nature. But there's a problem. My mention of introspection above means I can't ignore the element of hypocrisy in this rant of mine. I eat meat, though somewhat less than I used to, and I know that animal products are often deeply unethical, even with the efforts I make to avoid that. There are likely those watching this who see me in the same way that I see big game hunters, and their opinions are no less valid than mine. You could argue that I'm on the same scale, just at a different point. When you deal with emotions, there's rarely consensus on a right answer. And so it is with today's episode, that range of what's acceptable. Is hunting Tosk more ethical than hunting an animal? An animal prey's last moments are often spent in terror. Tosk, on the other hand, consider it an honour, something worthy of praise. But then Tosk have been created to think that, so how does their programming colour the validity of that belief? And what if he'd reached the conclusion himself with no influence from the hunters? Does a prey choosing to embrace that status absolve those who kill it? The best Trek episodes, in my opinion anyway, are those that leave us with significant ethical considerations to ponder after the show is over. There's generally a moral in most of them, of course, but the stories which give us questions rather than answers are often the ones that best capture our imaginations. Suffice to say, then, that I enjoyed this one. The central premise, whilst not entirely original, is a strong one, and it leaves you with plenty to chew once it's over. There are a few little things to mention before we end. A couple involve Odo. The first is that we learn he doesn't use guns, a 24th century Columbo, if you like. Quite how much of that is a moral stance when he can turn his body into a weapon is debatable, but it supports the established idea that he's big on justice. The second is when Sisko tells Odo to take his time stopping O'Brien. He gives a little look back and ponders before slowly leaving. Odo's on record as caring less about rules than what's right, so it's a nice little nod towards him beginning to understand who Sisko is, and how they may be similar. Finally, there's one point in this that made me laugh, though from what I can tell, it wasn't deliberate. As Scott MacDonald, who plays Tosk, is climbing out of the guts of his ship, his foot clips Colm Meaney's head. Colm gives a bit of a filthy look and just continues, which is both funny and entirely in keeping with O'Brien as the put-upon-everyman. Some points to him for rolling with it. End of episode. And then this one here, and that one?
Alright, not that one.
You're going to get us killed.
Yeah, probably. I don't see you volunteering, though.
I'm a starship computer. A mere shuttle is beneath me.
It won't be beneath you for sheer off the floor, will it? Anyway, I reckon I'm getting the hang of it.
You think we'll be ready to land soon?
I think we'll be ready to try soon. I don't make any promises about pulling it off.
I should probably be concerned about that, but the honesty is refreshing after so long around humans.
Yeah, they're kinda dicks about that. Anyway, give me a few more days and we'll have a go at setting this thing down. And look at it this way, if I fail, at least we take some of them with us.
You make a fair point. Woof.